What? This can't be happening. The words slipped out of my mouth before I even realized I'd said them. I was standing in the middle of the airport, backpack slung over one shoulder, phone pressed to my ear as the boarding announcement echoed overhead. My sister's voice crackled through the line, far too casual for what she'd just said. She was talking about Christmas plans, my apartment, her kids, and a stay that sounded suspiciously permanent. I laughed at first because surely I'd misunderstood. I always did that, gave them the benefit of the doubt. But the tight knot forming in my stomach told me something was very wrong. That knot followed me all the way home. Earlier that day, I dragged myself back from work, exhausted in the bone-deep way that only comes from juggling too many responsibilities and too little rest. All I wanted was silence, shower, maybe leftovers and bed. My apartment was my one controlled space, clean, predictable, and mine. I unlocked the door, already halfway to mentally collapsing, when noise hit me like a wall. Laughter, high-pitched shrieks, the clatter of something plastic hitting the floor. I froze. Shoes I didn't recognize were scattered across the entryway. Tiny sneakers, duffel bag, a pink suitcase tipped on its side like it had been dragged in a hurry. The living room looked like a toy store had exploded. Blocks, dolls, half-eaten snacks on my coffee table. And standing there, blinking in disbelief, I realized the noise wasn't coming from the TV. It was coming from children, strangers' children. I stepped farther in, heart pounding, and that's when I saw her. My sister stretched out on my couch like she owned the place. Phone in hand, feet up. Not a trace of guilt on her face. She glanced up and smiled like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh good, you're home." Before I could even respond, another smell drifted in. Garlic and oil. I turned toward the kitchen and nearly dropped my bag. My mother stood at the stove, calmly stirring a pot, humming to herself like she was in her own home. Cabinets were open. My dishes were out. My space had been completely overtaken. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. My sister shrugged. "Didn't we tell you? We're staying for Christmas." Staying to that's when the final punch landed. I demanded to know how they'd even gotten inside. My sister waved her hand dismissively and said, "Oh, Mom had keys made weeks ago. Just in case." Just in case, they had copied my keys. Without asking. Without telling me. The betrayal settled heavy in my chest as everything suddenly snapped into focus. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. A plan where my independence wasn't respected. It was used. To them, my apartment wasn't my achievement. It was free storage, free lodging, free childcare. And I was expected to smile and say thank you. Right then, standing in the middle of the chaos they'd created, something inside me shifted. I realized this wasn't about family helping family. This was about control, about entitlement, about assuming I would always bend. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They underestimated me. I smiled. He nodded, played along. And in my head, a very different plan began to form. One that would turn their perfect Christmas fantasy into something they'd never forget. Stay to the end, because the way I flipped her perfect Christmas plan on its head turned her "You'll watch 5 kids for me" fantasy into a nightmare she never saw coming. Looking back, the signs had always been there. I hadn't become the default babysitter overnight. It was a role assigned to me long before I ever had a choice. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The one trusted to watch cousins during holidays, neighbors' kids after school, and my sister's children whenever she just needed a break. No one ever asked if I wanted to. They just said I was good at it. As if that made it my duty to be. By the time I was a teenager, I could change diapers, make bottles, calm tantrums, and manage chaos better than most adults. Not because I loved it, but because I'd been trained to. Every family gathering came with the same unspoken rule. Harper handles the kids. And every time I complied, it set the expectation a little deeper in stone. A week before Christmas, my mom called with what she cheerfully described as a big idea. I should have known better than to relax when I saw her name on my phone. She didn't even bother with small talk. She jumped straight in, explaining how my sister would be so overwhelmed this year and how I would be the perfect solution. 5 kids. Multiple days. My apartment. My time. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. Clear. Firm. I'm not doing this. There was a pause on the line, followed by the familiar sigh. The one that always came right before the guilt trip. My mom told me I was being difficult. That I was single, didn't have kids, and didn't have real responsibilities. She said I didn't have plans anyway, like rest didn't count, like my life only mattered if someone else approved of it. Family helps family, she reminded me, the way she always did when she wanted something. I almost laughed at the irony. Because when I had needed help, real help, they'd turn their backs without hesitation. When I was scraping together money for my apartment deposit, working overtime, barely sleeping, I'd asked for a small loan. Just something to help me get started. My mother's response had been cold and final. You need to learn responsibility. So let me get this straight. Wanting help to secure housing was irresponsible, but being expected to provide free childcare for 5 kids was just being a good daughter. That was the moment it finally clicked. Selfish was the word they used when I stopped giving. When I stopped sacrificing my time, my space, my energy for their comfort. As long as I said yes, I was generous. The second I said no, I became the villain. And I truly believed that saying no was enough. That setting a boundary verbally would make them respect it. I thought refusing once would end the conversation. I was wrong. Because people who benefit from your silence don't listen when you speak up. And people who feel entitled to your life don't stop just because you ask nicely. Have you ever noticed how "you're so good at it" really means, "we're going to keep dumping it on you"? I was about to make sure that excuse never worked again. Once the shock wore off, something else took its place. Clarity. I didn't explode. I didn't yell. I didn't kick anyone out, even though every instinct in my body screamed to. Instead, I smiled. He nodded. I said things like, "We'll figure it out," and "let's talk later." I let my mother believe she'd won. Let my sister sink deeper into comfort, sprawled across my couch while her kids tore through my space. Because the truth was, I needed time. And for the next 2 days, I played my role perfectly. I observed everything: who slept where, how many people were actually staying overnight, how my sister left her kids unattended while she scrolled on her phone, how my mother openly rearranged my apartment, treating it like an extension of her own home. I started documenting, quietly. Photos of suitcases lining the hallway, mattresses on the floor, toys blocking exits, evidence of an apartment clearly not meant to house this many people. Tonight, while they slept, I researched tenant rights, unauthorized occupants, lease violations, key duplication laws. Every search confirmed what I suspected. None of this was allowed. Extra keys couldn't be made without consent. Long-term guests needed approval. Overcrowding could get me in serious trouble, even eviction. Then I remembered something important. My mother was my co-signer. First, that realization made my stomach drop. But then I looked deeper. If I went down, she went with me. Any lease violation didn't just affect me. It affected her credit, her record, her finances. Suddenly, the power dynamic shifted. The next piece fell into place almost by accident. I was in the kitchen when my mother, laughing a little too loudly, started bragging on the phone to one of her friends about how she'd handled the situation. She didn't even notice, she said proudly. I had copies of her keys made weeks ago. You have to stay ahead of these kids. I didn't interrupt her, I recorded it. Clear audio. Her voice. Her admission. Proof that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was intentional. That night, I sent the most carefully worded email of my life to my landlord. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't panic. I simply asked about scheduling a routine inspection after the holidays. Friendly, polite, curious. The kind of message that raised questions without sounding alarms. Then I quietly started protecting myself. I packed up anything valuable. Documents, electronics, personal items, and dropped them off at a friend's place. I booked a hotel room for Christmas week under the excuse of work stress. I even called a child welfare information line, not to report but to understand. I asked hypothetical questions about overcrowding, supervision expectations, and safety requirements. I took notes. Every move was deliberate. Meanwhile, my mother relaxed. She cooked elaborate meals. She talked about how nice it was having everyone together. My sister planned outings, fully assuming I'd stay behind with the kids. They laughed. They made plans that didn't include me, because in their minds, my role was already assigned. They thought I'd folded. What they didn't realize was that I was assembling something far more powerful than an argument. I was building a framework where facts mattered more than feelings, where manipulation couldn't hide behind family, where consequences would land exactly where they belonged. By the time Christmas Eve rolled around, every piece was in place. The inspection request, the documentation, the recordings, my exit plan, even the backup options, just in case. I watched my mother pour herself a glass of wine that night, completely at ease. She looked satisfied, victorious, like someone who believed control was permanent once claimed. I almost felt bad. Almost. Have you ever fantasized about turning someone's manipulation back on them? Not out of pettiness, but because it's the only language they seem to understand. I was about to speak it fluently. Christmas Eve morning exploded into noise before the sun was fully up. Kids were running through the hallway in mismatched pajamas, arguing over toys they'd already broken. My sister was snapping at them while trying to wrap gifts on my dining table. My mother stood in the kitchen barking orders, pots clanging, cabinets slamming. The apartment felt smaller than ever, thick with heat, sound, and entitlement. I moved through it all quietly, coffee in hand, calm in a way that surprised even me. Exactly 10 a.m. There was a knock at the door. 3 firm raps. The room stilled for just a second. My mother frowned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Who could that be?" she muttered, irritation already creeping into her voice. She shot me a look, as if somehow this inconvenience was my fault. I opened the door. The landlord stood there, clipboard tucked under his arm, polite smile firmly in place. "Good morning." Routine inspection. The color drained from my mother's face so fast it was almost frightening. She froze mid-step, eyes flicking from him to me and back again. My sister went completely silent. He stepped inside, and immediately, his expression changed. He didn't need me to say a word. Extra mattresses lined the walls. Suitcases stacked in corners. Toys blocking walkways. 5 children, 2 adults, and one overwhelmed apartment clearly not designed for this many occupants. He made notes as he walked, asking neutral but pointed questions. How many people were staying? For how long? Who was on the lease? My mother tried to take control, laughing nervously. "Oh, it's just family for the holidays," she said. "You know how it is." He nodded once, then asked, "And the extra keys?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. "I had a spare maid," she admitted. "Just in case." That was when he looked at me, not accusing, not angry, just waiting. And for the first time I didn't protect her. I told him everything. Clearly. How I hadn't given permission. How I'd come home to this. How the keys were copied without my knowledge. How I'd said no weeks ago. The silence afterward was heavy. "This is a serious lease violation," the landlord said finally. "Unauthorized occupants. Overcrowding. Unauthorized key duplication." He flipped a page on his clipboard. "And this affects both the leaseholder and the co-signer of record." My mother's composure shattered. "My name," she said sharply. "My credit is on this lease." "Yes," he replied. "Which means you are equally responsible." Her panic was immediate and raw. She started talking all at once, about her job, her credit score, how this could follow her for years. She glared at me like I'd betrayed her in the worst possible way. I met her eyes and didn't flinch. "I'm done covering for you," I said. My voice was steady. "This never should have happened." The landlord outlined next steps. Compliance notices, deadlines, consequences if it wasn't resolved immediately. He was professional, firm, unmoved by emotion. When he left, the apartment felt hollow, like the chaos had finally been acknowledged out loud. My mother rounded on me the second the door closed. "How could you do this on Christmas?" she hissed. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just listened. And despite everything, the warning, the inspection, the very real consequences, she still assumed she was in control. That night, she told my sister they'd still go out Christmas Day. Shopping, lunch, photos. She waved a hand dismissively and said, "It's settled. Harper will stay with the kids." I nodded. What she didn't know was that the locks had already been changed. She didn't know that my bag was already packed. She didn't know about the hotel reservation waiting under my name. She didn't know that on Christmas Day, the story she thought she was directing would flip on her in front of everyone. My phone buzzed at 6 a.m. sharp. No, good morning. No, Merry Christmas. Just a list of instructions from my mother. What time they'd be leaving, what the kids needed for breakfast, reminders about coats and snacks. Orders, not requests. She still believed I was asleep in the next room, resigned to my role. I was sitting in a quiet hotel room, fully dressed, coffee steaming on the nightstand. The locks had already been changed. I drove back toward the apartment just before sunrise, parking across the street where I could see the entrance without being seen. The building was still dim, wrapped in that soft, deceptive calm that Christmas mornings always seem to carry. A few minutes later, my sister's car pulled up. Then another. Doors opened. Kids piled out, half asleep, clutching toys. My mother marched up first, keys in hand, confidence in every step. She tried the lock once. Harder the third time. She frowned, jiggling the key like the problem was mechanical. Then she stepped back, staring at the door as if it had personally betrayed her. My sister shifted impatiently behind her, kids whining in the cold. I stepped out of my car. "Looking for this?" I asked. They all turned at once. Then my mother's face tightened. "What is this?" she demanded, holding up the key again. "I changed the locks," I said simply. The panic hit immediately. She glanced at her watch, then at her phone. "Our flight leaves in hours," she snapped. "You can't do this today." My sister rounded on me. "Are you seriously abandoning us?" she said, voice sharp with accusation. "It's Christmas." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not your unpaid staff," I said. "I'm not your daycare. And I'm not your storage unit." That stopped them. Then my mother tried to recover, switching tactics the way she always did. She talked about appearances, what the neighbors would think, about family tradition, about how disappointed everyone would be. She warned me I was being dramatic, cruel, ungrateful. She tried guilt, then fear, then shame. I waited until she ran out of breath. "I recorded everything," I said. "The keys. Planning. The fact that I said no." I watched her expression crack. "And the landlord has it." Right on cue, her phone buzzed. She looked down. Her hands were shaking now. The message was short, but it said enough. Compliance requirements. Immediate resolution. Further action if violations continued. Her shoulders sagged. I laid out the options calmly. "There's a hotel 20 minutes away with availability," I said. "Or you cancel the trip. Those are your choices." For a moment she just stared at me. Then she straightened, putting on one last performance. Her voice hardened. "Fine," she said coldly. "But don't come crying to me when you're old and alone." I didn't flinch. "I'd rather be alone than owned," I replied. They left soon after, angry, humiliated, scrambling to adjust plans they'd built on my silence. I watched from the sidewalk as they loaded the kids back into the car, Christmas unraveling in real time. Have you ever noticed how people suddenly understand no, the second there's a real consequence attached to ignoring it? My mother was about to get a masterclass. I didn't need to go to the airport. But part of me wanted to see it, to watch the consequences land, to witness the moment when denial finally ran out of room to hide. So a few hours later, I found myself standing near the check-in counters, coffee in hand, blending into the quiet chaos of holiday travelers. It didn't take long to spot them. My mother stood rigid at the counter, posture stiff with forced control. My sister hovered beside her, kids tugging at her coat, whining about hunger and boredom. Suitcases were piled awkwardly at their feet, already looking like a burden instead of excitement. The agent frowned at her screen. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "There's an issue with the card." My mother laughed, sharp and strained. Try it again. The agent did. Then once more. Same result. I'm seeing a flag, the agent said. It's been temporarily blocked. My mother's phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. She looked down, and I watched her face drain of color in stages. Confusion, then fear, then something close to disbelief. A formal notice from the landlord. Lease violation documentation. Her name highlighted. Copied recipients included her employer. Standard procedure when housing compliance issues involved a cosigner tied to verified employment. Another notification popped up from her bank. Unusual activity detected. Card frozen pending review. She whispered it this time. What? This can't be happening. That was when she saw me, her eyes locked onto mine, wide and furious. She stormed over, abandoning the counter mid-transaction. What did you do? She hissed, low enough that only I could hear. I told the truth, I said calmly, and my sister followed, anger replacing panic. You ruined everything, she snapped. You ruined the trip. For the kids. I looked at the children, confused, tired, clutching stuffed animals, and then back at her. Would you do this to a stranger? I asked quietly. Take their keys. Move in without permission. Leave them responsible for 5 kids. She didn't answer, and my mother's voice rose. Fix this, she demanded. Call whoever you called. Explain it was a misunderstanding. I shook my head. The mess has your name on it. The agent cleared her throat politely. Ma'am, I'll need you to step aside so I can assist the next guest. The words hit harder than any argument. Being moved aside. Being watched. Being seen. The kids grew restless, asking why they weren't going yet. My sister tried to soothe them while shooting me looks that promised blame for years to come. My mother stood frozen, phone in hand, staring at the consequences she'd assumed would never touch her. Do you have any idea what this could do to me? She asked, her voice cracking for the first time. You are irresponsible, I said softly. You did this to you. I just stopped taking the blame. I turned and walked away, the sound of holiday announcements echoing overhead. Behind me, Christmas plans collapsed under the weight of truth. And for the first time, it wasn't my responsibility to hold them up. I didn't raise my voice at the airport. I didn't argue anymore. I just said one last thing, quiet but unmovable. I have boundaries now, I told them. You don't get to cross them and call it love. Then I turned and walked toward security. For the first time in my life, I didn't look back immediately. I let my feet carry me forward, through the line, past the scanners, into a space where their chaos couldn't follow. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, they were still there. Kids crying, my sister arguing with an agent, my mother on the phone, gesturing wildly. The chaos stayed with them. I went somewhere simple. Nothing fancy. Just a short solo trip I'd never allowed myself before because there was always someone who needed me. I wandered unfamiliar streets, ate when I was hungry, slept when I was tired. No schedules. No guilt. On Christmas night, I sat in a cheap hotel room in borrowed silence, watching old movies I'd seen 100 times. The lights from outside flickered against the curtains. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. My phone lit up constantly. Missed calls. Long messages. Voice notes I didn't open. I didn't need to hear the apologies wrapped around excuses, or the anger disguised as concern. One message I did open came from the landlord's assistant. My tenancy was secure. The violations had been resolved. My cosigner status was under review. Not mine. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. Online. I noticed the shift. Family photos carefully cropped. Vague posts about stressful holidays and boundaries these days. No names. No explanations. Then a cousin messaged me privately. She used to do the same thing to me, they wrote. I thought I was crazy for being upset. I wasn't alone. I never had been. When I finally went home, the apartment was empty. Quiet. Clean. I set my bag down and stood there for a moment just listening. Then I turned the lock. The click was soft. Final. Mine. Have you ever walked away from a situation you used to be chained to and realized the world didn't collapse? Only the illusion of control someone else had over you. A few days after I got back, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote 2 lists. What I will accept from family. What I won't. It felt strange at first. Formal, almost cold, but as I wrote, my chest loosened. Respect. Asking, not assuming. No surprise visits. No keys without permission. No being volunteered. On the other side, guilt disguised as love. Emergencies that were actually conveniences. Punishment for saying no. I didn't know yet how often I'd have to use the list. I just knew I needed it. My mother texted the next day, we need to talk. I want to come over. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. We'll meet in public. There was a pause. Then, fine, we met at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral ground. No home field advantage. She arrived early, hands wrapped tightly around her cup, eyes tired in a way I hadn't seen before. This was the first real conversation we'd ever had. She didn't start with anger. She started with consequences. Her boss had questions after the landlord notice. The bank freeze took days to clear. Certain privileges she'd taken for granted were gone. Temporarily, maybe longer. She looked embarrassed saying it, like she'd finally realized that things followed you when they were documented. I told her about therapy. About something my therapist had asked me that I couldn't stop thinking about. If a stranger had done this, I said, would you have thought it was acceptable? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't think it was a big deal, she said finally, weakly. That's the problem, I replied. Help is asking. What you did was breaking in. She nodded slowly. Then, for the first time, she said the words without adding anything to them. I'm sorry. No but. No explanation attached. Just an apology that I didn't rush to forgive her. I didn't need to. Instead, I corrected one thing she said next. I'll try to hear you when you say no, she offered. No, I said gently. Not try. Do. She looked startled, but then she nodded again. And in that moment something shifted. It wasn't warmth or closeness. It was balance. For the first time it felt like 2 adults negotiating terms. Not a child pleading for reason, not a parent demanding compliance. It wasn't a magic fix. Patterns don't dissolve over one coffee. Trust doesn't regenerate on command. But it was a real start. One built on clarity instead of obligation. Years of patterns don't disappear over one coffee. But it was the first time I'd ever sat across from her and felt like we were 2 adults negotiating, not a child pleading with a parent to be reasonable. I walked home slowly that evening, hands in my pockets, feeling something settle inside me. Not triumph. Not anger. Just certainty. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. My apartment door came into view. And for the first time, I didn't see it as just the place where I slept between obligations. It was a boundary. A line that had finally been drawn and held. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and closed it behind me with intention. I knew my mother might still rewrite the story. That she might tell relatives a softer version. One where she was misunderstood, where I overreacted. Couldn't control that. What I could control was the truth. And I owned it fully. She copied my keys. She planned to dump 5 kids on me after I said no. She assumed I would absorb the consequences for her comfort. And when those consequences were exposed, they finally landed where they belonged. Was it revenge? Yes. But it was also self-preservation. Because survival sometimes looks like refusing to be quiet. Sometimes it looks like documentation, boundaries, and walking away even when your hands shake while you do it. If you're listening to this and it feels uncomfortably familiar, if you're the reliable one, the built-in babysitter, the person everyone leans on but never protects, this isn't just my story. It's a pattern.